Hello, welcome to Stories in Time. My name's Eloise Schottler. I'm your storyteller. I've been going back through some of the stories that I've had around for a while but haven't told in a long time. And you know, that's sort of like going through a photo album, the memories, thinking of when you found them, how you found them. And this is one that falls in that category. It's a Civil War story, actually, and see what you think about it. The young man stood up from behind the rock. He put up his gun and his finger pulled the trigger, and Dwight Faircloth felt the ball hit him in his chest, and he heard the young man calling out, "Take that to Abe Lincoln, Yank." As Dwight started to pitch forward, he raised his own gun and pulled the trigger, calling, "For Jeff Davis, Reb." And then he was flat on his face in the dirt. He could smell the fresh earth and the grass at first, and then he was smelling Drusilla's perfume. Only a few weeks ago he had been up north at a dance with Drusilla. He was so in love with her. She was beautiful with long black hair, and that night she had a rose in her hair. She was wearing a purple dress. They had come, they were going to dance. He looked so handsome in his Union uniform, the buttons down the front. He came in a little late. And she looked at him and she said, "Why? Why are you late again?" "I had a duty. I had to do it." "It's duty, duty, always that with you. Why won't you leave the Army?" "If you leave the Army, my father says we can go ahead and get married sooner." "I would love that, Dwight. We could have a house. We could have our own home. We could start a family." "I can't talk about that. I cannot and I will not leave the Army. Let it go, Drusilla." And he pulled her into his arms, maybe a little closer than he should have. And they went out onto the dance floor, and they were playing a waltz, their favorite waltz. When Dwight looked up and he saw someone from his regiment waving to him, and he said, "Drusilla, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go. That man is calling me because the colonel wants me, and we're taking a train this evening. We're going south, my dear." "Oh, Dwight." And he held her still and he said, "But we will dance to this waltz again. And when you feel an arm around your waist and someone whispers in your ear, 'Is this my waltz, ma'am?' you'll know that I've come back for you." And he left. And indeed they did board the train, and they headed south. It was a few weeks after that dance that night that Drusilla was sitting at a delicate little desk in her bedroom. There was papers all around her. There were a few crumpled on the floor. She picked up her pen again and began to write, and then she crumpled the paper and threw it on the floor. Taking in a deep breath, she picked up another paper and put it on the desk, picked up the pen, and her eyes and mind were set, and she was determined this time. And she started the letter. "Dear Dwight, I hate to do this, but I have to write you. Father says we're not really in love. That you've seen my pretty face and you're so handsome in your uniform. Is that really love for a lifetime, for a marriage? And I'm going to marry Martin. Father says I must write you now, write you ahead of time, not hold you when I am going to marry Martin." She signed the letter, and then she added a postscript. but I'm not putting the ring in this envelope. I'll leave it here with Father, and the next time you're up this way, you can stop in and he will give it to you. Then she sealed the envelope. Just as she was standing up from the desk, she heard out the window from a party boat on the river down below the strains of their favorite waltz. Oh, Dwight, Dwight, and she threw herself over the bed, sobbing. The afternoon that Dwight Faircloth took that ball in his chest, the doctor was standing beside his bed with the nurse. Why do these boys hang on like this, sister? Why? His lung is shot away. He can't possibly live. Why is he hanging on? Let go, man, let go. Doctor, he can't let go. Why? Is he waiting for something? Yes. He's waiting for a letter from his fiancée. He loves her so much. He's just waiting for the letter from her. Oh, ridiculous, and the doctor walked away. The next day, Sister Agnes was out when the mail came, and she saw the letter right there on the table for Dwight Faircloth, and she picked it up and went rushing across the room to his bed. She almost tripped on her long skirt. It's here, it's here. Captain Faircloth, it's come. He saw her. He heard her. She knew he couldn't read the letter himself. I'll read it for you. And she opened it, and she looked at the letter. Let me read it out loud to you. It's a sweet letter. My darling Dwight, I've heard that you've been injured, and when I heard of it, it tore my flesh, just like that ball must have torn yours. And I pray every day that you'll soon be well and that we'll be together again. Forever, my darling, forever. All my love, Drusilla. He looked up, and then his breath became thready, and then the breath stops, and he was gone. Sister Agnes stood there for a while. She looked at the real letter, and she remembered what she'd just told him. I would do it again, she said to herself. I would do it again for him and for any other boy that's on the edge of the grave and needs to know they're loved. A few months later, the dinner had been sumptuous. The guests were there. They were dressed well. They looked lovely. It had been such a special occasion. And Drusilla, on her new husband's arm, walked into the ballroom. Just as they came through the door, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Martin put his arm around her, and as he did, a fierce wind hit the side of the building, and the French doors blew open. And the wind just raced around the room, and everyone was afraid. And Martin said, "Stay here, Drusilla. I must find out what's happening so that I can help my guests." And she stood there, and as he left the room, she was standing here on the dance floor alone, and she felt an arm around her waist that pulled her close against his military buttons. I think this is my waltz, ma'am. And as they started out across the dance floor, Drusilla looked up into Dwight's face. Dwight, Dwight, I've come back from my waltz, Drusilla. And they whirled around the dance floor. The wind had settled down. It wasn't blowing. The door wasn't banging any longer. And they whirled around the dance floor, and Drusilla whirled and whirled and circled and circled and circled, and her veil flew out behind her until it came off her head. Her flowers that were in her hand she was holding, and they scattered, taken right out of her hand, they scattered onto the floor. Martin walked back in, and he saw his bride hysterically dancing and whirling out on the floor, and he ran over to her and put his hand on her shoulder and said, Drusilla, Drusilla, what is the matter? What is going on here? And she said, he's come back. He's come back. My lover has come back for me. He's come back, Martin, and he's taking me with him. Her eyes widened a bit. She looked into his face, and then she fell forward against him. And she too left. She left Martin standing there, holding his lifeless bride. Thank you very much for listening. Come back. We'll have another story next week.